Are you a business owner or entrepreneur who's had great success in the business world, and now you want to launch a speaking career to share your message with the world? If that's you, then listen up. 25-year speaking industry veteran Brett Ridgway has released his latest special report, 3 key things entrepreneurs must master to build a profitable speaking business. To pick up your copy, go to brettridgway.com/freebie. Welcome to the Spotlight on Speaking show with Brett Ridgway, where you'll learn the keys to building a profitable speaking business from speaking industry pros. Each week, we interview a great guest who will share his or her speaking journey, identify what their keys to success have been, and highlight some critical mistakes they've made along the way that you'll want to avoid. Be sure to visit our website at spotlightonspeaking.com. And while you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, sit back, tune in, and get ready to meet this week's guest.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Spotlight on Speaking show. I'm your host, Brett Ridgway, and I'm going to ask you a question. On a scale from 1 to 10, how comfortable and effective would you say you are in using public speaking in business to influence others? Mary Cheyne is my guest today, and she's going to show you how to leverage public speaking to influence in business. She's a transformational public speaking trainer and coach and has trained over 30,000 people in 30 cities around the world, including those in Australia, Europe, Asia, Canada, and the United States. Despite starting out as a self-conscious computer programmer, Mary went on to become the 2009 World Champion of Public Speaking second place winner out of 35,000 contestants from 14 countries. Mary's a TEDx speaker, and the video of her talk has over 500,000 views. Mary's also the author of the best-selling book, Present Yourself in Public Speaking, Tell Your Inner Critic to Shut Up, and the real you to speak up. Mary, welcome to the Spotlight on Speaking show.
Thank you, Bert, for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
All right, so I got to dive right into this whole public speaking competition in 2009, but I want to back up even before then, Mary. So what caused or was the impetus for the transition from being a computer programmer to being a public speaking person and a trainer?
Yeah, that's a great question. It happened in steps. The initial impetus was as a computer programmer, I was extremely self-conscious. Being in a conference room and not knowing when to chime in, not knowing when to ask questions, or having a question and then not asking it because I had all these noise in my head that was stopping me from speaking up. And so learning the skill of public speaking was one of my top priorities because I knew that that was going to hold my career back. But ultimately, it was following my intuition and pivoting a little step at a time so that I can be in front of others. So I went from a computer programmer to a software trainer. So that allowed me to be in front of a room all the time and getting used to that. And I didn't know anything about speaking, but I knew software. And then from there, I moved to becoming a skills trainer. So skills, teaching different kinds of skills, leaving the software behind, and then ultimately teaching speaking, which is what I've been doing for a long time. So it happened in steps, think of them as pivots, but ultimately following my intuition along the way as I got called to speak within my own desire to want to serve and own desire to want to help others to overcome the challenges that I had.
All right, so when you first began that transition to the first pivot point or whatever, what did you use to get yourself to overcome that shyness, that fear? I mean, how do you tell somebody who's just too damn nervous to want to get in front of people to get over it and get in front of people?
Yeah, there's like 2 ways I'm going to answer that question. The first way is ultimately what I learned, what I saw once I started teaching speaking back to others was that I immediately recognized that most people that was coming to me for help were already subject matter experts at what they did. So clearly it wasn't about the content. Like they knew their content inside out, back to front. Of course, yes, there's ways you can structure it and ways you can curate your content in such a way that's more engaging than boring, right? So that's one element. But the biggest challenge that I noticed that was holding people back was not so much about how to deliver it, but more about how they're showing up, and that when they do show up to speak, they're not being their most authentic self. They're like, there's so much anticipatory anxiety there in the way, almost like an invisible wall between them and the audience, that and I knew that that was true for myself too along my own journey. So I had to reverse engineer the way public speaking, the way I was teaching public speaking, because as you may have noticed from the beginning all the way to now, I myself have invested in a lot of public speaking training as a student. So I got to see that the majority of courses out there in training public speaking dealt with the mechanics of speaking. 99% of them dealt with the mechanics, and yet what was holding most of my clients back was actually the what I call your inner critic voice, and that is a very high level way of describing the internal noise that's in your behind the eyes, so to speak. And so ultimately the teaching and the reverse engineering of that, and then creating curriculum around how to calm that voice and how to calm those nerves, was the number one thing that I had to do in creating my own curriculum, that I feel is the most important element, if that, what you just described, is their biggest challenge.
All right, so going back to the 2009 event, first question is, what was your topic? What was the theme of your talk for that particular competition?
That is a great question. I'll give you one guess. Actually, I'll just tell you, the inner critic.
Okay.
Yeah, it was ultimately, it was really around, and I didn't realize that until I looked back, because that was in 2009. That was many, many years ago. And I looked back and I was like, oh my God, this has been a through line. It's like, if I'm struggling with it, I'm sure many other people are struggling with the same thing, right? The inner critic. So the way I share is, it's not so much getting rid of it, because as long as you're continuously stepping outside your comfort zone, that automatic negative voice is going to be there. It's just a matter of you're shifting your relationship to it so that you're embracing it and have it travel with you, rather than allowing it to drive your car, so to speak.
So were you a public speaker about overcoming your inner critic before you became a trainer of public speaking? Or was it immediately into, I'm going to be a public speaker trainer and this is my topic?
It kind of happened organically, because I was, and this is part of, the element of, people ask me, like, well, how do I become a successful public speaker? How do I use speaking in my business? And those are actually, there's an overlapping Venn diagram, but those are actually very different skills to cultivate. And so it happened organically in that, like I mentioned, I knew it for myself, that was one of the biggest things holding myself back, was like, and see if you can relate to this. If we were to really uncover, what was happening behind the scenes of our mind to prevent us from playing a bigger game, so to speak, right? Whether it's on the stage or in your business, it's like, well, who am I to be the one speaking about this? There are other people who are better than me at this topic. There are other people more experienced than me. Well, I've always been told I'm too much, so I kind of want to tame myself down a little, like all these elements that are kind of happening at the back of our minds that are holding us back. So rather than having it be this insidious voice that's holding us back, I brought it to the forefront and say, let's address that. Mm-hmm. And when I started doing that, because I knew for myself that was one of my biggest challenges coming up the ranks, so to speak. And when I started sharing this, lo and behold, it was actually not a personal thing. It was a universal thing that everyone was dealing with. And so let's tackle that. And so what I'm out to do is really to normalize that and to, hold this safe space for people to go, oh, I'm not the only one. Oh my God, this is happening for everybody, right? And then so to have processes and techniques on how to deal with that voice and calm it in such a way that it no longer holds you back from shining your brilliant gifts and your wisdoms, your teachings, and what you've been through, your stories, all of those things that if you were to share it can help other people. And so it was a pretty organic process. And then recognizing the pivot point, recognizing, OMG, this is a universal challenge that all humans have.
All right, so there are three primary types of speakers in my mind. Now, I'm not going to count trainers, although that is speaking, but you got your keynote speakers, you got your what I call platform sellers, and then you have, local businessmen not just using it for business building purposes, speaking to Rotaries or whatever. Which of those arenas have you played in, and which of those arenas do you prefer?
It's all of the above. All of the above. I play in those arenas. And the reason I don't segment as much, I don't compartmentalize like that. The way I think about it is, yes, those are separate channels, and yes, those are different mediums of distribution, so to speak. But really, what I hone in on is the core message. Like, what is your core message? What is my core message? How is it that I help people? And starting with that as my basis, and then going ahead to the different arenas that you just mentioned, and then some, including training, in order to really allow that message to get out. So it's really, to me, it's more about the message, and I play in all those arenas because that's a way that I can reach more people. And depending on what it is that I am, what my call to action is, I'm always providing value regardless of whether, the people in the room end up working with me or not. So I'm not so picky as to, which arenas, but in terms of the learning, like learning how to play in all those three arenas, I feel makes one a more well-rounded speaker and makes one more have more options depending on what is it that you're wanting your audience to do as a result of hearing your message.
So how do you measure the success of a speech in your mind?
What's the word?
How do you measure the success, whether a speech has been successful for a given audience?
Measure. Okay. Yeah, I couldn't understand your accent. Measure. Okay. Thank you. So it depends. It depends. Like with my clients, for example, some of my clients are in the corporate world and they're either leaders or they're emerging leaders in their arena that they work in. Well, while others are business owners and they want to use speaking to amplify, letting others know what it is that they do and invite them to work with them. So depending on what your intention and goals are, in my opinion, there are quantifiable measures as well as non-quantifiable measures. So a low-hanging fruit, easy quantifiable measure, an objective measure is, well, how many people ended up, whatever your call to action is, ended up taking that call to action, right? That's an obvious direct measure. But then also keeping in mind that if people don't necessarily take action right away to work with you, or in the case of a corporate world, let's say you are asking for funding from the leadership team, right, for a particular project. And let's say if they don't say yes right away, it doesn't mean that they're not going to have opportunities down the road. So why I share that is I've experienced a lot of times when you get the message out and you provide the value up front, so it's like front loading the value, then the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. So you're helping others, you are servicing them, and then down the road they might come back and work with you. So it really depends on what your goal is, and that's the quantifiable measures. But then the non-quantifiable measures, and this is how I invite all of my clients and students, which I use those two terms synonymously, to have the mindset or the framework of coming into learning speaking and becoming a better and better speaker. And some people that come to me are already professional speakers who are doing very well. They're already really good speakers and they really want to take their game to the next level. Maybe now they want to sell from the stage. Maybe now they want to be able to sell a service or product that they haven't done before. And so as a result of that, the frame of mind that I invite everyone who's wanting to become a better speaker, regardless of their arena, is to have the beginner's mind. So in other words, be an open-minded learner. And as a result of that, like, how am I improving? Asking yourself, not so much comparing yourself to other speakers, which is a phenomenon, because, we all have egos and we all, susceptible to looking at the left and looking at the right and going, oh my God, how am I comparing to these other people? Which is a trap, even though we all do it. It's also a trap because it's an egoic trap, and, it doesn't necessarily lead to a peaceful conclusion, regardless of what your answer is. So my suggestion is, when you're a learner and you're comparing yourself, am I better than I was last year? So you become your own baseline, you become your own litmus test to compare to. And if the answer is yes, I'm better than I was last time, well, then you get to decide what those measures are for yourself and how is it that you are actually improving. So for example, I know this is a long answer to your question, but I'll give you an example to make it a bit more tangible. When I also like to, measure and have, things that are tangible to measure myself against. So for example, when I first started my business and I was out there speaking and sharing with others, providing value, but then sharing with others about my 2-day boot camp, which is typically the entry level of when people come work with me, they attend my 2-day boot camp. And so I would have this big spreadsheet. So if you're a linear thinker, you probably can resonate with this. I would have this big spreadsheet with, all the different elements that I was measuring myself against. And at the end, how many people decided to come work with me. And then afterwards, I would see, what were my conversion rates? And what did I do in this speaking engagement compared to, say, that speaking engagements, when this one, the conversion rate was great, this one, not so much great. And so I would have across the board the different various speaking engagements and how I did, and then reflecting upon myself and going, okay, so when I converted really well, what was it that I was doing that I wasn't doing over here? And so I ended up mapping out a whole bunch of different variables, such as, it's mechanical variables, like, was I being too serious? Was I, being a little bit more jovial and lighthearted over here? And was I being more forceful here? And was I being more, lighthearted and relaxed over here? So there were all these different quantifiable as well as non-quantifiable things that I was measuring myself against. Come to now find out, my most recent evolution of that way of thinking is, well, am I showing up? Am I attached to the result? Right? So not being attached to the result and showing up with my heart wide open and, hey, I'm here to serve, and I'm being sincere about it. And, this is one of those things that no one else can tell you. It's like you have to know for yourself, right? Like, you really look at yourself deeply and go, okay, what was my real intention there? Because what I found is the more attached I am to the results, the worse the results, right? It's kind of backwards in a way, but in a way that keeps me honest. So again, that's a long-winded answer to your question.
All right, so Mary, how do you assess an event in advance to determine if it's a proper fit for you? What are the things that you look at to decide I should speak there or I should not speak there?
Yeah. So I know who my audience is. And at the beginning, I didn't so much. It was more through trial and error and iterations. And then now, having done it for full time, almost a decade, and knowing who my clients are who just continue working with me. Like I've got clients that work with me year after year after year because they just want to keep, they see their own results and then they keep wanting to improve their baseline. And then reverse engineering, oh, okay, these people are the ones that resonate with me. And 95% of my clients are women. Like I said earlier, half of them are in the corporate world and they're already in leadership or they're emerging leaders and they want to take their game to the next level. And they want to help others. So, the demographics being, well, they're women. They're usually women in their anywhere from their late 30s to their mid to late 50s. So that's kind of like a wide gap in terms of demographic. But in terms of the way they think and the way they approach life is they're very heart-centered. They want to help others. They're there. They want to speak because they want to serve. They really have a heart of gold. And, I'm very lucky. Typically, they're a little bit more sensitive in nature in that they're feelings oriented, but they're also very achieved. So they're very high achievers. Like they have their master's degree, they have their PhD. So they're very smart people and they have a heart to serve. So my litmus test is really the audience that I'm going to be walking into. How many of these kinds of people are in the audience? And sometimes it's more of an obvious thing, and sometimes it's more like gut feel. A lot of my clients are in the STEM field, right? The science and mathematics and technology field. So, are they open-minded to come to these events and they want to learn? And typically they are, because otherwise they wouldn't be at the event. And so that's kind of my litmus test is how many of my ideal clients who are open-minded skeptics, because I don't want people to just believe in me. I want them to take what I've taught them, apply it, and then allow their own direct experience to be the authority of what they feel is true or not. So I want open-minded skeptics who are open-minded learners. So that's kind of my litmus test to see who I go to and who I don't.
All right, so Mary, give me let's say your three biggest tips, and let's just call it for delivering a successful speech.
Okay. I will start with a high level mindset tip, and then I can go into some mechanical tips. So, and I do separate those because they are quite different, the way you approach speaking. Number one is have a beginner's mind. In other words, don't do what you've always done. Like have a stomach and to try different things that you haven't tried before. Unless you're happy with the results that you're getting, then that's cool and you can do what you want to do. But if you're not getting the results that you want, have an open mind to try some different things. That's what I would say. And then the more mechanical tips are, most people speak to inform, especially in the STEM field, especially if they've been trained more from a linear thinking perspective. They tend to give a fire hose of information and a fire hose of facts, one after another, after another, after another. And while facts and information are important, the way I would coach people to curate their content is not from the perspective of informing as much as it is to what I call SIPI. It's an acronym, SIPI. SIPI is sell, inspire, persuade, and influence. And so when I say sell, I don't necessarily mean selling a product or a service, because like in the corporate world, you might not be doing that, but you're always selling an idea. You're always selling a point of view, right? So having that hat on, the SIPI hat, having the SIPI hat on rather than just informing is to, for example, switch the way you would introduce each thing you're saying in a way that leads them to a certain conclusion rather than pushing a certain point of view to them. So asking questions, for example, along the way, telling your stories in a way that's going to lead them to a certain conclusion that's for their own highest good. And you hear it all the time, tell stories. And what I say also with your stories is the actual tip, like a tip for telling stories. Tip, TIP, is tie it to a point. Please tie it to a point, because if there's no point to the story, then, and the point is not leading to a particular conclusion, then it's not an effective story, no matter how entertaining it is. And then the second thing about telling stories is the KISS method. And the KISS is, in my humble opinion, is keep it super short. Keep it super short. So 1 to 2 minutes, that's it. And so, the work that I do with my clients is, giving them frameworks on how to do that, how to curate a story that's jam-packed with inspiration in 1 to 2 minutes and has a point to it, again, that leads them to a certain conclusion. Those are my tips.
All right, so I've got some other questions I want to ask you, Mary, but before we do, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsor.
Are you a business owner or entrepreneur who's had great success in the business world, and now you want to launch a speaking career to share your message with the world? If that's you, then listen up. 25-year speaking industry veteran Brett Ridgway has released his latest special report, 3 key things entrepreneurs must master to build a profitable speaking business. To pick up your copy, go to brettridgway.com/freebie.
All right, so we are back with the Spotlight on Speaking show and my guest, Mary Cheyne. So, Mary, when you are looking at an upcoming speaking engagement, and we talked about doing your homework in advance and all that, and how you measure success, etc., what things do you feel are most critical for a speaker to control in terms of the speaking environment that they're going into?
Did you say control?
Control, what, factors that are within their control. Some things are beyond their control. I mean, they might not have any control over the temperature in the room and the lighting or whatever, but there are factors that they can control. So what are the most critical elements that you feel a speaker should control for a talk?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so it depends. There are some common global elements that I'll speak into about the environment that they can control. And the other point is it depends on what it is that what they're speaking and what their intention is and why they're speaking. So for the global one being the environment. Okay, so when you are going up to speak, and by the way, let's draw a distinction between in person and online, because online's not going to go away, but neither is in person. So you got to understand which kind of platform you're working with. Let's start with the in person. With the in person, the environment, my recommendation is you want to go and scope out the room as early as possible, way before the time of your speaking. In fact, if you can, get the event organizer to send you a picture, a photograph of the room and the dimensions of the room so that you have a better idea. And then when you're there at the actual venue, go there as early as possible. And then if you can, rearrange the room or have the people in the event organizer help you rearrange the room to your liking and to the environment that's going to be the most hospitable for connection for the audience, between you and the audience. For example, one of the things that you'll see in a lot of speaking environments, especially as a keynote speaker, you'll have a lectern. People have a lectern, which is like a physical object that's between them and the audience. I don't recommend standing behind a lectern. And that's, by the way, that most people say, they say the platform, or they'll say the actual stage. But the lectern, you want to move it out of the way, number one. And then in terms of the chairs and the different kinds of seating arrangements in the room, certainly lends itself depending on what you're doing there. Like, for example, when I'm in a training environment, I like more of a classroom style. But if it's a keynote environment, I like more of an auditorium, like a theater style seating, so that there's less physical space between each person, so there's more of an intimate feel, and therefore it lends itself to interaction and connection. So controlling the room, and of course technology. I mean, when I was first speaking professionally, at the beginning, I bumped into one of my mentors, and at the time that I was working with, and he goes, "Hey Mary, have you had any technology issues yet?" And I said, "No." I was so proud of myself. I was like, "No, I've got no technology issues." He goes, "That's because you haven't been doing it for long enough." So, one of the ways to proactively make sure you don't have any technology issues is to go there early, test out your technology, and make sure you know what platforms you're working with, right? Especially in a hybrid situation. In the corporate world, there's a lot of hybrid situations where there's some people online, some people in the room, and that's a tricky situation. So you want to test out the microphone, test out if you have anything that you're going to click on in your presentation that's going to require the internet, make sure you're logged into the internet, make sure that you have the password. There's all these little tricky things that you can control well ahead of time if you're proactive. If it's a Zoom situation or an online platform situation, make sure if you want to test out that particular platform, with the presenter, with the event organizers ahead of time, so that you know where's the chat features, where's the this feature, where's that feature, where do I share my screen, how do I share my screen, all of these things that you want to test out beforehand. So that all goes under the environmental controls, right? Being proactive about that. And then the other elements that you can control, and this is what I alluded to earlier, is your own mindset. I always say set an intention before you go on the stage, whether it's in person or virtual. What is your intention? And be very mindful about having it be the highest intention, because if you're there to serve with your heart wide open and you're there to help people, and you yourself set that intention, chances are that the audience can feel it, because it's so much more than, when you're communicating as a speaker, it's actually so much more than just the content you're sharing. It's even more than your delivery style. It's also how open is your heart, because the audience are not just hearing your content, they're also receiving an energetic transmission from you, whether it's conscious or unconscious. So who you bring to the table, who you show up as, with your heart open, or are you there for, for the results, for the sale, for the, how many people are how much money I'm gonna make? If your intention is accidentally slips down to that level, then that's also going to be unconsciously received from the audience, and you're probably not going to do as well, because at the end of the day, like, your highest intention is going to determine how your message is going to be received. So I would say those are the best things to make sure that you quote unquote control before you go on the stage.
All right, so Mary, you've trained over 30,000 speakers during your career. What's the biggest mistakes that you see speakers make?
Yeah, so in addition to reverse engineering everything that I've just shared, right? So don't do those things. I think the number one, okay, so this is I'm going to go a bit philosophical here, okay? Because I like to go deep with my clients and really get to the root of things. And I think one of the biggest mistakes is letting your ego lead. And so again, this is very tricky, because it's one of the biggest blind spots. It's so hard to be objective about yourself, right? It's kind of like trying to read the label of the jar from inside the jar, because it's like that whole objectivity thing. So you got to be really honest with yourself and reflect for yourself. How much am I there to, show what I can do and to perform? I mean, I'm not saying performance, there aren't any, I mean, for every presentation, there are elements of showmanship, right? Like in your stories, to make them more engaging. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but really check yourself to say, am I doing this to fulfill and satisfy my ego, or am I doing this really to serve? And it's a tricky fine line, right? Because you got to be honest with yourself, and nobody apart from yourself can tell you that answer, right? As a speaker, especially, it's great. It feels great at the end when people come up to you and go, oh, that was amazing. And oh, that was really inspiring. I really learned a lot. And that's great. But at the end of the day, and then there are times when you don't receive any validation, you don't receive any feedback, right? Like Doug Stevenson, who I learned from many, many years ago, said that speaking is a thankless job, because at times you don't get any feedback, right? You don't know. And your talk, how effective it isn't determined necessarily right in the room when you finish speaking. It's determined days and days, weeks, months, perhaps even years later, when the person who listened to your talk, comes to that point of, should I choose X or Y? And then they remember something you say from your talk, and they chose Y instead of X, and Y is a better trajectory for them. That's how your talk was effective. But you as a speaker, that might never come back to you. So again, I would say the biggest mistake is leading with your ego, because at the end of the day, you're there to serve. There's lots of ups and downs. It's your commitment to serve that's going to get you through the ups and downs. So the biggest mistake is check your intention.
All right, very good. So As we wind down this episode, Mary, I want to give you a couple of minutes to tell people a little bit more about what it is that you do specifically and how they can get involved in your world if they so choose.
Thank you. So I offer a 2-day boot camp, which is typically how most people start engaging with me. And I also have a Shine mentorship program. Shine stands for Speakers Hungry for Impact Empowerment. So again, typically people who come to me have a message and they really want to use their wisdoms to help others. Those are the 2 typical programs that I would recommend for people to look at. And I'm actually rebranding right now. My new website and new brand is called Heart First Communications. Heart First Communications. The website is, as we speak right now, is currently under construction, but it points you back to my current website, which is magneticpodium.com. And I will just say, as my last message to your listeners is, as you speak more and more, you will evolve and your points of views will evolve. You yourself, as your skills get better and better, will evolve. My call to action here is, don't be stingy. Don't be stingy. You have wisdoms that others can learn from, and make sure you take the trainings and coachings and invest in yourself as a student, as a forever student, to get out of your own way in order to do that.
All right, fantastic. So, Mary, I want to thank you so much for being my guest on this episode of the Spotlight on Speaking Show. I wish you the greatest of success in all that you do as you move forward. And to all the listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us today. And as always, may this year be your best year yet. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
This has been the Spotlight on Speaking Show with Brett Ridgway. Be sure to join us every week as we interview speaking industry pros and have them share their best tips for building a profitable speaking business. Until next week, thank you for tuning in, and remember to visit our website at spotlightonspeaking.com so you can enjoy even more great episodes like this one. While you're here, be sure to subscribe via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Spotlight on Speaking Show. Until then, our sincere best wishes to you for the greatest of success as you work to build your own profitable speaking business.